Hello, everyone, and welcome to Deploy Patch Update of application patching. Sorry. So I'm Ben Ward. I'm Field CTO UK and I at Liquid, and today I'm going to be talking to you about what the Liquid platform is, but especially why it's so important to patch your applications. Okay, we're going to be having a look at a couple of examples of applications. We've got a few slides and a couple of videos to show you what the Liquid platform looks like and how we can get around the challenge of application patching. Now, one of the big issues I tend to see when it comes to anything to do with enterprise applications is the ability to deploy, update, and access. Okay, and I think one of the taglines that I is the fact that probably over the past 20 years or so, what we've seen is a real move to make Windows much easier, and Mac OS to a certain extent, much easier to manage and to secure and to patch. So we can do that now. As an industry, we can keep Windows and Mac OS up to date. But the piece that's been left behind is lifecycle management of the applications. So the ability to make sure that applications are patched in a timely manner and to make sure that you've always got the latest version of that particular application. You don't tend to see that so much with native Microsoft applications, but it's the third-party apps that still make up the bulk of most application estates that's the problem. So we're going to go through what that looks like. Now, we've seen a big change, obviously, over the past few years in the model of endpoint management. If you think about the way that it used to work, it was something like this. You'd have a PC on a desk and you deploy the applications to that PC, and you would just replicate that particular model multiple times across your estate, across your real estate endpoint estate. You'd have those applications, and when it comes to updating those applications, that was a reasonably straightforward thing to do as well, because you'd have some legacy technologies like SECM or group policy to update the application stack on those devices, and that's pretty much what it looked like. But the thing is, over the past few years, we've seen a huge change and a huge migration from that old model, from the old way of doing things. And most of the organizations, most of the customers and prospects that I speak to right now in 2023, their problem looks a little bit like this. Multiple laptops, multiple mobile endpoints that it can be very difficult to deploy applications to. Now, these new types of applications and these new types of endpoints, they aren't connected into your corporate LAN. And a lot of the time, they may not be connected into your corporate WAN. These may well be using networks that you don't control. They may be using hotspots potentially. They might be in coffee shops. They might be working from home. So the network, the context that these devices now operate in are no longer controlled by you. But you still need to be able to deliver applications and keep those applications up to date. It's become much more difficult over the past few years to be able to do that. Now, there's a reason why you need to be able to keep those applications up to date and keep them patched. So as an example application here, I've chosen an application which is probably one of the most common, one of the most heavily used in the world, and that's Chrome. And most organizations are using Chrome. You might be using Edge, you might be using something like Firefox, but generally Chrome is still the biggest internet browser out there. Now, that means that Chrome also has a much higher profile. So from a vulnerability perspective, from an exploit perspective, there are people out there trying to work out how to hack or crack or exploit Chrome. So I did a little bit of research on this application, and I looked at very, very recently, I looked at the latest threats that had come up against Chrome, and I checked the critical vulnerability database, the CVE database. And these are some of the threats that I found. There are actually 14 threats that I found over the past, in a sort of a week-long period. And that's one of the really important things about this. There were 14 threats, and I've chosen 7 of them. And these 7 threats go from low risk, so that's green, through medium risk, and those are the orange CVEs you see on the screen at the moment, and then high risk. If I went back 14 days, there was actually a critical risk exploit. This is one application, this is 1 week, 14 exploits, and one of those is high risk. Now, some of the organizations that I've been speaking to have anywhere from 300 applications to 6,000 applications. If you can imagine trying to understand the threat landscape of 6,000 applications on one hand, that's very difficult. But on the other hand, you have to understand what the exploits are and also whether or not the vendor, the application vendor, has released an update or a patch for that particular exploit. And that can be a very, very difficult thing to do. Let's have a look at 5346. So CVE 2023-5346 on the screen, and that's the high risk exploit for Chrome. So here's a bit of information about that particular exploit or that particular vulnerability. And I don't quite understand what this means, okay, but this is the information that came with it. So type confusion in V8 in Google Chrome prior to version 117 allowed a remote attacker to potentially exploit heap corruption via a crafted HTML page. And you can see there the base score for this particular exploit, this particular vulnerability is 8.8, which is categorized as high. Now let's have a look at a little bit more detail about this particular critical vulnerability. Now here's more information. This comes from the CVE database, but you can see down the bottom left-hand side, you've got a date the record was created. And this was created on the 3rd of October 2023. Now that doesn't mean that the exploit was first discovered on the 3rd of October. This is when the record was created. And this means this is when it became a known exploit and where a record and information was created for this. So here's a bit of a quiz question for you. And I don't think you can answer this unless you want to put something in the Q&A. Here's a bit of a quiz question. How long do you think it took from that CVE record being created to Google actually patching this particular exploit? Well, this surprised me to a certain extent, and I think it's probably because Google is very on the ball with this stuff. But there was an update for this application, for this particular exploit, actually released the same day, Tuesday, October the 3rd, 2023. So as soon as a critical vulnerability record was created for this particular exploit, there was a patch. So we talked about the fact that actually keeping track of vulnerabilities can be very, very difficult. And keeping track of fixes for those particular vulnerabilities can be very difficult too. But there's another key piece here. And that's the ability to actually get that patch, understand that there's a patch for that particular exploit, and then apply that patch. That is pretty difficult. And a lot of organizations that I've been speaking to don't have a really, really good way of getting those application patches deployed to those applications in a timely manner. Now, in the UK, we have something called Cyber Essentials Plus, and this is the baseline for cyber security capabilities when it comes to being in the public sector. So in the UK, every public sector organization needs to be Cyber Essentials Plus certified. And any organization that wants to work with the public sector also needs to be Cyber Essentials Plus certified. There's a really, really important mandatory baseline here for deploying updates to exploits. And I'm going to read this out for you. All applications must be updated, including applying any manual configuration change required to make the update effective within 14 days of an update being released, where the update fixes vulnerabilities described by the vendor as critical or high risk. Now, Cyber Essentials is serving as a baseline for a lot of different governments around the world and institutions around the world, because that 14-day timeline, while it's 2 weeks and quite a long time, anything less than that would be amazing, but it can be quite difficult to implement. So what I want to do now, so now we know what the problem is. Now we know what the challenge is. A lot of the applications that we use on a daily basis are going to have exploits against them. They're going to have vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities may well be exploited very, very quickly, but vendors tend to patch those applications reasonably quickly, depending on the application. So how can we actually get those patches and those updates from the vendor to the applications? Well, this is where Liquid comes in. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Liquid platform first, and then we'll go into how it actually deals with these particular exploits. And I'll show you a couple of demos of this as well. So Liquid is an application delivery and lifecycle management platform that's been built for Windows and Mac. And we can deliver pretty much any type of application or package to the endpoint. So we can deliver MSI, MSIX, AppX and AppV, XE's, native Win32 applications. We can deliver applications from Liquidware, so FlexApp. We can deliver applications from Numescent Cloud Paging, etc. Basically, anything you want to run on the endpoint, the Liquid platform can deploy for you. And we can also wrap a lot of automation around that too. And one of the really key capabilities we have is we have one of the most comprehensive application stores in the industry. We call this the Liquid Setup Store. But within the Liquid Setup Store, we have approximately 4,000 applications that we have already automated for you. You still need to have a license for those particular applications, but we have already taken all the hard work out of deploying those applications. We've made it as simple as one-click deploy. So potentially, if there's an application you use in your organization, instead of you having to package that, or instead of you having to go in and create automations to install it or to launch it, we do all of that. We control the install, the updating of the application, and the launch of the application. And we make that very, very straightforward. I'm going to show you what some of this stuff looks like. The key to what Liquid does is that Liquid becomes the single source of truth for all the applications in your organization. So you, even if you're using something like Citrix or VMware Horizon, or if you're using AVD or Windows 365, you can use Liquid to deploy those applications across to pretty much every platform that you've got. So it could be a virtual desktop, it could be published applications, it could be directly to a local Windows 10, Windows 11, or Mac OS desktop. And the really key thing about this is, if there's an application update from the vendor, and you can see this here in the example of PowerPoint, then what we'll do is we can automatically deploy that update across to all of the different platforms you have in your environment to make sure that all of the different applications across your platforms are updated in a timely manner. We can either do that automatically, or you can be notified that there's an update, and then we will do that for you. What I want to show you next is a brief overview of what the Liquid platform looks like. Okay, so we'll go through what the platform is, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the ability to update applications. So what you see in front of you is Windows 11, and we've got the Liquid launcher. And what we can do from the Liquid launcher is we can go in and we can subscribe to applications. You've probably seen an application launcher like this before. We do some very cool stuff. So I can go in, I can grab Excel, I can grab PowerPoint, I can grab Word, and I can grab Outlook. And what will happen is the first time that I click on one of these applications, you can see it's created all the shortcuts on my desktop as well. The first time I click on one of these applications, it's going to install it. So I could just go in here and I could click on Word. If Word isn't already installed, it will then install Word for me. And then once that's installed, it will launch. And all of this is completely silent and transparent to the end user. There's no need for the end user to do anything in this case. And you can see Word is installed, and then we're good to go. But we can replicate this across multiple platforms. So we could potentially do the same thing if a user uses Mac and Windows. And because of the way that a user can subscribe to applications, what will happen is those applications will follow that user around onto Windows as well. So if they go onto Mac and subscribe to the same applications that we saw in the previous example. So they can go into the catalog, they can click on Excel and PowerPoint and Word and Outlook, etc. And those shortcuts will appear on the Mac desktop. And the first time the user clicks on it, what it's going to do is launch Word for Mac. But those same applications can follow that user around. You can see they've also got the same applications now appearing on their Windows device too. And when they click on Word on both of these platforms, it will install it, and then it will launch the right version for that end user. And we have a whole amount of automation that goes into making this really, really powerful. We have something called smart icon technology. And what smart icon technology enables us to do is to make sure the user always has the right version of the application. So if we go in here and have a look at Excel and go down to actions, you can see some of the automation we have against this particular application. We've got launch capabilities. And you can see here for Mac, what it's doing is it's installing the Mac app if it's a Mac endpoint. Here it's launching Excel if the endpoint is Windows. And we do the same thing when it comes to install as well. And you can see here we've got open URL. So in this case, if a user's context matches when a user clicks on Excel, then what could happen is that Excel opens in a browser. So go to office.com/excel/launch. So we can change that in real time. You can see here we've got open URL now at the top of the launch list, so the launch control. So if I want to make that live, I can simply take it through our 4-stage pipeline and drop it into production. Fantastic. So that new workflow is now live. So when the user clicks on Excel, Excel will query the platform to find out what the workflow is, and then it will open Excel in a browser. You can see here what it's doing is actually talking to the Liquid Universal Agent rather than talking to any .exe or any browser. Then the agent says, this is how you need to launch Excel. So if I click on Excel, this should then open the browser. Fantastic. It's taken me to office.com/launch/Excel. And I'm signed in and I'm good to go. But we can change that, and we can change that in real time. So if I want to go back to the platform, back to the management console, I can simply go back into the Excel application. So here we go. If I click on packages again, then click on Excel, and then go back down to actions, I can change this particular workflow. So I could have Horizon. I could drop that to the top. There we go. And then take this from development into production. And then this new workflow is now live. Now, obviously, I'd have to have a VMware Horizon platform in place to make this happen. But this is now live. So I can go on to Mac. I can click on Excel. And this time, because the automation's in the back end, what it's going to do is launch the Horizon version of Excel. And this is only sort of part of the automation that we can do, because we can make it decide, we can make the platform choose what to launch based on the context of the end user. We have multiple different filters in place that we can use. And that's what I'm going to show you next, how you can actually put in different contexts to make sure the user gets the right application. And some of this stuff, again, ties into security. So if we go into Excel, have a look at filters, then in here you can see the filter capability that we've got. And we could say, look, if you're not on a trusted network, a network that we control, actually, when you click on Excel, we want it to launch as a published application. If it's not a Windows platform, we want it to launch as a published application. If you're not, if you don't have a certain certificate on the endpoint, or potentially if you're running an older version of Windows or Mac OS, we have so many different ways of being able to automatically and dynamically choose what happens with that application and what happens with the application launch. So I can go in here, I could choose process exists. This could be an antivirus process potentially. And if there's something that you want to check that we don't have surfaced in the GUI, you can run scripts. So we have the ability to execute scripts against the endpoint to make sure that the end user always has the right application for the job. And you can see here we can choose which browser to open the URL into. So that's our automation capability. That's our smart icon capability to make sure users always have the right application. There's a huge security implication to that. Now, one of the really cool things we have in the platform is our Liquid Setup Store, which is the 4,000 application store that I was talking about earlier. So if we go in here and if I click on resources, you can see some of those 4,000 applications. We can scroll through. I'm going to show you this in more detail a little bit later on. So I can simply scroll through pages of these applications. And if I want to grab one of these applications, it's very, very straightforward. All I'd need to do is simply click on that application and then assign it to a group of end users. And then all the automations that I'd want to have will be there and they'll be good to go. So if I go in here, I can do a search for an application. I'm going to search for Teams. I'm then going to select Teams and I'm going to go through the process of deploying Teams to, in this case, my Windows 11 machine. So you can see here, leave that as a managed application. I'm going to deploy that straight into production. Usually you probably look for acceptance testing instead. I'll cover the CV piece shortly when we go through the updates capability. So this platform can be completely integrated with Azure AD, by the way. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to assign this to everyone. I'm going to create a desktop, start menu, and taskbar icon. I'm not going to select Mac OS desktop because at the moment this is just for Windows. I'm going to click confirm, click next, and finish. What it will then do is pull Teams down from the Liquid Setup Store into my zone. So that application now sits in my zone. It's still managed, there's still a link, and we can still update and manage that application. Here we go. So here is the application and it's ready to go. And all the automations you need to deploy that are good to go. So if I go back to the users console, the users launcher, here we go. I can just select get, subscribe to the application, go to my workspace, and then the application shortcut should appear on the desktop. There we go. And the first time I click on Teams, it should start the install process for me and then launch. It's as simple as that. Now, when it comes to updating the applications, and again, I'm going to show you a very high-level overview of what that looks like, but we'll go into some more detail shortly, then I can simply click on Updates. And you should be able to see here a list of updates that I have pending for all the applications I previously subscribed to. And if I want to deploy that update, I can do it here. And we'll cover the CVE piece shortly. So click Finish. And then what that will do is it will download that update and then deploy it to all of my end users and all of my endpoints who currently have, in this case, definition updates, which will be everyone, on their local machine. So we've now updated this, but we can do all of this automatically. And that's something I'm going to show you very, very soon. So if I move on, what this actually looks like from an update perspective, and a key point to call out now is even though we have the Liquid Setup Store, and we have the ability to automatically update applications, you can also add custom applications to the platform. So let's say you have Teams, okay, and then like we saw just in that previous example, let's say you have Teams and Teams has an update and you want to control those updates rather than letting Microsoft do that for you. So you can do that. You can go to the Liquid Setup Store, and what will happen is Microsoft releases a new version of Teams. We can flag that up for you. We can let you know, and we can automatically deploy that update. So that update to Teams then gets deployed to all the endpoints you want it to go to. If it's a custom application, we can do pretty much exactly the same thing. But in this case, you're in charge of the updates. So you have Chrome, maybe, as an example, even though we have that in the Liquid Setup Store, let's say it's a custom application. You put that into your zone. You then update that to the latest version. And it could just be as simple as updating the file, the executable or the MSI. And then all of the steps, all of the automation steps around that, you can still have in place. So that application then gets seamlessly deployed into production. So you could have multiple different app stores potentially. You can have the Liquid Setup Store, you can have the local store. We can have the Microsoft Store for Business. So you can get applications from multiple other locations like the Citrix Store potentially, and then have all of these deployed to end users. And just for a sort of a flow diagram of what this would look like. So you have the Liquid Setup Store, then the vendor updates the application. We will then pretty much straight away update that application in the Liquid Setup Store. We'll also do a vulnerability scan and we'll do a virus scan on that application. Then we will notify you, and this is just one of the ways it can work, notify you that that application has an update, and then you can deploy that application to production. So I'm going to show you a little bit of this in a bit more detail now about what this actually looks like in practice. I know we saw it a little bit in the previous demo, but I want to show you this in more detail. So in this case, what we're going to do, press play. We're going to go back into connectors, and then we're going to have a look at the Liquid Setup Store again. You can see I've got extra connectors in here, but I'll explain those. So in this case, I click on resources. Again, you can see all the applications in there. In this case, we've got tags as well. You can see all the applications in there, and we have pages of applications, and we are constantly adding new applications. We have a whole team of people, an automation engine adding new applications to the Liquid Setup Store all the time. And I can show you what all of this looks like. So if we wanted to select one of these applications, we could absolutely do that. So we can use Chrome again as an example. So going to Chrome for Business, click Next. You can see here there is a vulnerability listed. So the latest version of Chrome actually has a critical vulnerability listed against it. We always also do a virus scan of this. If there is a vulnerability or if there is a virus, we will let you know. You can actually click on that critical vulnerability and drill down. So if I click on that now, it'll bring up a whole load of links that I can click on to go and have a look at that vulnerability in more detail. So if I click on CVE details, you won't see that, actually opens off the screen, but you can then see some of the information I showed you earlier for a different exploit. So you have all the information you need to be able to make a choice about whether to deploy this application or this, this particular app. So if I go back into connectors and then click on updates, what you should see is a whole list of updates pending for all the applications that we have. Now, I want to pick on VirtualBox a little bit here because this is an update to an application I've already subscribed to. But if I have a look at this, push into production, you can see there are 3 critical vulnerabilities against this. Again, I can select all of these vulnerabilities and have a look at what they are. There is nothing stopping me from deploying this, but I know that there are critical vulnerabilities pending for this particular update. And what this basically means is, if it's in our store, then the vendor themselves haven't updated and patched these particular vulnerabilities, because as soon as they release an update, we then put that into our store. Now, we can automatically update these applications too. So I've created a connector, a new connector here, which is just a new view of the Liquid Setup Store. And all I'm doing here is grabbing one application, Adobe. And what I've done is I've created a scheduled task. And what that does is it synchronizes the connector and then downloads and applies updates. Hopefully you can see that there. So I can point it at this new connector, this new view I've created in the Liquid Setup Store. I've selected download and install updates, and I want those pushed out to acceptance testing. So whenever this synchronizes that connector, it will download and apply updates for that one application. It will then notify admins that there is an update, but what this one does is it actually automatically updates that application. So it will notify you, but it will automatically update. Now, there may well be not that many scenarios or circumstances where you want to automatically patch an application, but potentially in this case, because it's patching the application into acceptance testing, then if you have a group of users who sit in acceptance testing within the platform, then they will automatically get the updated version pushed out to them, and you can have them notified, excuse me, via email that they have got the updated version of the application and it's been patched for these particular reasons. Now, you can see here we have a scheduled task. So this is checking the connector and synchronizing the connector every hour. So it will be checking if there are no updates, then it won't apply the updates. If there are, then it will download, apply the updates, then automatically patch that application. So we have multiple ways of doing this. We could just have it as a scenario where all it does is notify you that there's an update. In this case, this is downloading and applying those updates. So you can have numerous connectors if you wanted to, all doing different things to different types of applications. The more critical the application, possibly Chrome, you would want Chrome to be updated as soon as there's an update for it because it's such a high profile application. So one last thing I want to talk about is go into a little bit more detail. There's two last things I want to talk about. The first one is this smart icon technology, and I know I covered it a little bit earlier on, but generally this is what the workflow looks like. You can choose what happens with any application based on particular context, and it could be a laptop that's in the office that's connected to a corporate Wi-Fi, a corporate network. In that case, when they click on PowerPoint for the first time, that will install PowerPoint, and when they click on it, it will launch. But maybe they take that laptop outside of the corporate network and they go home on an untrusted network. In that scenario, when they click on PowerPoint, what will happen is completely transparently to the end user, maybe it will launch a Citrix published application. And then when they come back to the office, they click on PowerPoint, it will launch PowerPoint as a local application. It's as seamless and as slick as that. You can automate everything within the Liquid platform. And the last piece I want to cover is about how we work with the likes of Intune. We're going to work with VMware Workspace ONE as well. But if you're using Intune in your environment, then we can absolutely work with that. And you can use Intune to manage your endpoint devices, whether or not they're Mac or Windows. And then Liquid will take over all of the application deployment pieces here, because we can deploy native Win32 applications. We can deploy AppV applications if you're using that. We can keep your applications up to date. It's an absolutely brilliant way of being able to deploy applications right across your estate in a very, very modern way, while keeping Intune doing what it does best, which is managing your endpoint operating system and your endpoint devices. So if you'd like to have a demo, then please feel free to scan the barcode. Right, so now we have some time for some Q&A. So I'm just going to check to see if there are any. If you haven't asked a question yet, and I can't see any, if you haven't asked a question yet, now is your chance to. So I'm going to wait here for a minute or so just to see if anyone's got any questions. And if you don't have any questions, thank you very much for joining the session. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions, then please ask me or anyone at NETCB. Thank you. All right, there are no questions. So thank you very much, everyone, and take care. Bye-bye.